Hello folks, welcome back to Merrill Math. I'm Mr. Merrill, and today we're talking about even and odd functions. And we're going to try to understand an easy way to determine if a function is even or odd. Now, I will preface this by saying that this method only works if you have a graph of the function. So if you don't have a graph, if you just have the function written down in front of you, you'll either have to graph it and then use this method, or there are some algebraic methods that I will discuss in another video that is forthcoming. So the way to understand even versus odd functions starts with some definitions. So let's talk about those. Now the definitions are easy enough to understand, but they are a little bit cumbersome if you're not used to the notation. So what this is saying is, if you take an input, like a negative input for a function, just some relation that has to do with x, like x squared, for instance, and you put in a negative number and you get out the same thing if you put in a positive number, so like, for example, x squared, if you put in negative 3 squared, that's the same thing as positive 3 squared. That means this function is even. So the way we say that is if f of negative x is equal to f of x, then the function is even. Okay, so the second definition says basically the opposite. So if f of negative x is the opposite of f of x, then the function is odd. So that's saying if you put in a negative number and you get opposite of the output you would have gotten if you put in the positive number, then that means your function is odd. If neither is true, then the function is neither. So a function doesn't have to be just even or odd. It could be even, odd, or neither. Just like with numbers, like the counting numbers. 2, 4, 6, 8, those are even. 1, 3, 5, 7, those are odd. But the stuff that's in between all of those numbers is neither. So most numbers are neither. So you'll encounter quite a few functions that are neither even nor odd. So the definition stuff, we've got that out of the way. If you don't immediately grasp that, that's fine. The graphing method that I'm about to show you will help make that a little bit clearer. So the first example we're going to look at, we've actually already spoken about, is y equals x squared. So with this, with our graphing method, what we have, I'm going to kind of overlay this, we're going to do some visualization. So if I take half of my graph, if I can take this half of my graph and sort of pick it up and flip it over the y-axis, so I make this rotation around the y-axis and it lines up with the other half of the graph, then it's even. So this particular way to tell if a function is even or not, we just sort of flip it around the y-axis. So we just flip it over this particular axis. So again, we have our function and we just think of flipping it over the y-axis, and if we can get it to line up with just that one flip, or you can also think of it as like a book, like they fold together like this. So in this case, this function is even because that worked. So flipping over the y-axis gives you an even function. That's not too bad. Now, this function, y equals x cubed, won't do that. So if I tried flipping this over the y-axis, I would get that, and that's not lining up with this. So the way that this works is it's actually two flips. So the way that I usually think of it is I flip it down over the x-axis, so like so, and then I flip it over the y-axis, like so. So this is two flips. So for the odd functions, that's sort of the definition of an odd function. So again, this is a flip down and then a flip over. So we flipped over the x-axis and then over the y-axis. That's how we can tell if a function is odd. So that's two functions down. We're going to take a look at a couple more. And this is going to be a very short video, so you don't have to look at me flipping all of this stuff. This is also a visualization thing. You don't have to have overhead transparency sheets, because those are probably kind of hard to find nowadays. Next function we're looking at is sine of x. Now this is a very common function. You see this quite a bit. So we're just looking at common functions here. So sine of x, we sort of have our overlay here that's following our function. Now, if we tried flipping this straight over the y-axis, we would notice that it doesn't line up. So it's sort of the opposite of it. So we can try our other situation. So we flip it over the x-axis. So this just gets flipped over. And then we flip it over the y-axis. So it gets flipped this way. And lo and behold, it lines up. So this was a double flip. So we flipped this one twice. We flipped it over the x-axis, and then we flipped it over the y-axis, and it lined up. Sine is an odd function. All right, last one. We can't leave him out. Cosine of x. Okay, cosine of x, we get our function to line up. So we've got this guy. Now, notice that, this one's an easy one, we can just take this function and flip it over the y-axis, and it's going to line up nicely. So when we flip functions over the y-axis, we think of them as being symmetrical over the y-axis. And this tells us that cosine is an even function. So cosine is even, sine is odd, x to the third, y equals x to the third is odd, y equals x squared is even. So we have kind of a basic framework for taking a look at all functions. If you have a graph of them, you can visualize this flipping motion. And that's just one of the easier ways to tell if a function is even or odd. Now, not all functions are going to have this characteristic of being even or odd. So be aware that that's not going to work with every single function, but this is just a quick and easy way to tell if a function is even or odd, just a quick test. Now, I also, I don't want to forget this, even functions we can say are symmetric around the y-axis. Odd functions, they also have a symmetry. They're symmetric about the origin. So if we fold it if we think of folding it through the origin, like things tend to line up, but I like to think of them as two flips, flip over the x, flip over the y. That seems to work easier for me. So that's just a quick and easy way to tell if functions are even or odd. If you have any questions, comments, points of clarification, you can post those in the comments below. Otherwise, thanks for watching.